The chair at the end of the third row had been set there as an afterthought, and Harriet Ashcombe knew it the moment she sat down. She had watched her mother place it herself that morning, dragging it out from the corner where the pianoforte usually stood, sliding it into the gap at the row's edge with the same brisk, cheerful frown she used when apportioning the last cold cut of ham. "There, that will do." It had been said to no one in particular, and yet it had been said to her, because everything her mother said about spare chairs and awkward gaps was in some way said to her. She had sat down in it now, in her plum silk that had once been an aunt's curtain and was now 3 seasons out of fashion, and she had folded her gloved hands on her lap, lifted her chin. The exact half-inch her governess had taught her, decades ago, was the difference between a lady sitting alone and a woman waiting to be pitied. The organ had begun the second hymn. Her sister Cecily, radiant in oyster silk and Brussels lace, was standing at the altar of the little country church with a baronet's second son, whose family owned a plantation somewhere in the Indies, and a mother in Bath. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was smiling correctly, in the way that only the Ashcombe cousins knew how to smile, with the corners of the mouth turned up and the eyes doing something private and evaluative behind them. Harriet was not smiling. She had tried, at the entrance, and her face had felt wrong, and she had let it go, and settled, instead, on the composed, agreeable stillness that had carried her through every drawing-room since she was 16, and had first heard her Aunt Louisa say quite audibly that it was a mercy the girl had a head for figures, because the Lord had certainly given her nothing else to trade on. A mercy the girl had a head for figures. The words came back to her now as they always did at weddings and at Christmas, unwelcome as a guest who lets herself in through the kitchen. She let them come. She had learned long ago that if you tried to shut them out, they only knocked louder, whereas if you let them sit down and take their tea, they eventually grew bored and left. She was, by any measurement the world used, a large woman. She had been a large child and a larger girl, and was now, at 28, a broad, tall, stout woman, with a full bosom and full hips, and a face her father had once, in a rare moment of clumsy kindness, described as handsome by candlelight. In sunlight, said her mother, she was better in a bonnet. Harriet had never made a great fuss about any of it. The cruelty came steadily from cousins and aunts, and once memorably from a footman who had thought her out of hearing, and she had trained herself early not to let it land where anyone could see. Her face in company was as calm and useful as a well-kept parlor. What went on behind it was her own business, and if she had not yet quite made peace with the woman she saw in mirrors, she had at least made peace with the necessity of not letting anyone else see her fail to. The vows were being spoken. Cicely's voice was clear and pretty. The baronet's son had a slight lisp on the letter R that made his pledge of troth sound like a shy child's promise, and Harriet was surprised and a little pleased to find herself feeling tender toward him, this man she did not know, who was after all making Cecily happy and rich in one afternoon. Behind her, in the pew where the London relations sat, someone whispered, "Well, at least one of them is off. That is something." There was a soft answering laugh, quickly hushed. Harriet did not turn. She had learned not to turn. Turning gave them the pleasure of being caught, and denied them nothing, since they would say it again anyway, later, over cake. The Sassam. Her mother had told her, 6 weeks earlier over the household ledgers, that Cecily's wedding would be an opportunity, and had used the word with the same brightness she used when speaking of a bolt of good muslin unexpectedly on sale. There would be the baronet's cousins, a widowed rector, with a decent living, a wine merchant of respectable means. Any of them, said her mother, would do. Harriet had listened, and had made a small, precise mark in the ink where a butcher's bill had been miscopied, and had said only, "Of course, Mamma." She had not said what she thought, which was that her mother had been saying any of them will do since Harriet was 20, and that at some point the phrase itself had become a kind of tomb she was expected to lie down inside without complaint. The hymn ended, the rector pronounced. Cecily and her baronet's son turned to face the church and were beautiful together in the way that all newly married couples are beautiful for the first 10 minutes before the day gets hold of them. The bells began. Everyone rose. Harriet rose with them and let herself be carried, chair to aisle, to porch to gravel, path to the marquee, stretched across the south lawn of Ashcombe House, and by the time she was seated again, at a small round table set at the very edge of the tent where the ropes came down, she had counted 12 separate glances that had slid across her and moved on without pausing. She noted them the way she noted errors in the accounts, without heat, simply as fact. A servant set a plate before her. Cold beef, jelly, an underripe pear. She thanked him by name, 'cause he was Tom Whitmore's boy from the home farm, and she had known his mother, and he flushed the way young men flush when a lady of the house speaks to them as though they are a person. And she pretended not to see the flush, because that was another kindness owed him. Now here is the thing you must understand. About a wedding in a house, like Ashcombe, child. It is not one occasion, but 3 laid on top of each other, like the layers of the cake. There is the ceremony, which belongs to the bride. There is the breakfast, which belongs to the mothers. And there is the dance, when the marquee is cleared and the fiddlers come, which belongs to whoever in the family has yet to be matched. Cecily had been matched at last, and Harriet's mother, standing near the champagne with her cheeks the exact color of the punch, was already scanning the tent with the expression of a general who has won one battle and is looking about her for the next. The next was Harriet. Everyone knew it was Harriet. It had been Harriet for 6 years. She ate half the beef and the whole pear and left the jelly, because jelly at weddings was always sweeter than jelly should be, and drank her ratafia in careful small sips because she did not want to be seen refilling. And when the tables were cleared and the fiddlers struck up, and the young cousins began to laugh and pair off, she withdrew, without hurry, and without any visible expression at all, to the same chair she had sat in during the ceremony, which had been carried out to the tent's edge for exactly this purpose. There, that will do. She sat. The first dance was Cecily and her husband. The second was the parents. The third and the fourth were the young cousins in their pairs, and by the 5th, Harriet had counted, without meaning to, that 4 different gentlemen had crossed the tent, glanced at her, glanced at their friends, and gone the other way. She was not surprised. She was not, she reminded herself, even hurt. She had been prepared for this precise arithmetic since breakfast. But there was a moment somewhere around the 6th reel, when the fiddler slowed for a country tune her mother had loved as a girl, and Harriet saw across the tent her cousin Amelia, dancing with the wine merchant laughing, her narrow waist caught in his hand, and something inside Harriet did the small ugly turn it always did at such moments. And she thought quite clearly, and without self-pity, I shall be doing this at 40, I shall be doing this at 50. I shall be doing this at 60. And there will be different chairs, but I shall be sitting in them, and I shall have this exact look on my face, and no one will ever ask me. The thought was so plain and so undramatic that she almost laughed at it. She did not laugh. She lifted her chin, the practiced half-inch instead, and she watched the dance. She did not notice, at first, that the tent had gone quiet at its far end. It began at the entrance where a man in dark traveling clothes had stepped in from the gravel path, and it moved inward, the way silence always moves at a party, first through the fiddlers, who did not quite stop but softened, and then through the servants, who straightened, and then through her mother, whose punch-flushed cheeks went suddenly pale. Harriet looked up. At the tent's opening stood a tall man, perhaps 32, dark-haired, plainly dressed for the country in a way that only a man of very great fortune ever dressed, plainly, with dust on his boots and something guarded in the set of his mouth. He was scanning the tent slowly. Not for a person he knew, Harriet thought, but for the person he had come to speak to. He was looking at faces the way she looked at ledgers, taking them in and moving on. Her father, red-faced and beaming, was already crossing to him. There were introductions, muffled by the fiddle. Her mother, recovered, was doing the deep sort of curtsy she saved for bishops and creditors. The wine merchant had stopped dancing. Cousin Amelia was staring. Harriet did not know him. She thought perhaps she had heard the name at some point, in the way one hears great names, as a distant church bell, meaning nothing to one's own mourning. Ashford. The Duke of Ashford. Someone at the London end of the pew had gasped it earlier that day, when the carriage had rolled past on the coast road and no one had known where it was going. He had, it seemed, been going here. He greeted her father. He accepted a glass. He allowed himself to be presented, one by one, to the London aunts and to Cecily and to her baronet's son, and Harriet watched him do it with the still, faintly weary courtesy of a man who had been performing this ritual since he was old enough to bow. He did not smile. He did not need to. He inclined his head at the correct depth for each rank, and his eyes did not linger, and Harriet, watching from her chair, thought, "He is not here for a wedding." He was not. She could tell it by the way his gaze kept sliding past the faces put in front of him, as though what he needed was in the room but not in the introductions. He was looking for someone. He had come, she understood suddenly, and with a small odd thrill of certainty, for a specific person. Her mother was flushing with excitement now. Ducal attention at a country wedding was a thing that would be spoken of at every card table within 30 miles for a fortnight. She was steering him gently, oh so gently, toward the young unmarried cousins. Amelia was being nudged forward. Amelia was curtsying. He was inclining his head at Amelia and looking past her. And then, quite without warning, his eyes came to rest on Harriet. She did not, at first, understand that they had. She had been watching him the way one watches weather from a window, without expectation of getting wet. But his gaze had stopped on her, and stayed. And when she felt it stay, she felt her own face heat, and she looked down at her gloves, and then, because she had trained herself never to look away as though ashamed, she looked back up, and met him. He was already crossing the tent. He crossed it directly. He did not stop for Amelia, or for the London aunts, or for the wine merchant. He passed her mother, who had turned to follow him and was now standing with her mouth slightly open, and he came to Harriet's chair at the edge of the marquee where the grass was trampled and the ropes came down, and he stopped in front of her. She rose. She would not receive a duke seated at her own family's wedding. Her knees had gone slightly odd, but her spine had done what her governess had trained it to do, and she was standing when he stopped a proper pace from her, and the whole tent had gone silent behind him, and the fiddler was still playing, but no one was dancing, and she thought quite lucidly, "This is a mistake. He means the girl behind me." He did not mean the girl behind her. There was no girl behind her. There was only the rope of the marquee. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. His voice was low and very even. "Would you do me the honor of a dance?" She heard it as clearly as if he had struck a glass. She heard, at almost the same moment, someone in the London pew give a small, sharp sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a gasp. She heard her mother make a noise, as though she had swallowed a bee. She looked at him. He was looking at her, and his face was still and grave, and there was nothing in it of joke, or of pity, or of the kind of gallant condescension that a certain sort of man occasionally practiced on women like her at balls, to prove to his friends how magnanimous he was. There was only the plain fact of the question put politely, and the plain fact of him waiting for her answer. "I do not dance, your grace," she said, because it was true, and because if she had said yes at once, she would have burst into tears, and she did not weep intense. "Then walk with me," he said, in the same even tone. "It is a fine evening. Your father has permitted—" She glanced past him. Her father was at his elbow, red as a beetroot, and nodding with such enthusiasm that his neckcloth had come slightly loose. Her mother, behind her father, had gone, still in the way that indicated she was reordering the entire universe in her head at speed. Harriet drew a breath. "Very well," she said. "Your Grace." He offered his arm. They walked out of the marquee. The tent behind them did not resume its dancing until they had passed the rope, and even then it began raggedly, as though the fiddler had forgotten his tune, and Harriet felt every eye on her back like the flat of a warm hand. He did not speak until they were on the gravel path that led down to the south walk. The evening had cooled, the light had gone that soft rose color that country light goes when a day has been very hot and is deciding, at last, to yield. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I have made you conspicuous." She looked up at him. His profile was as still as it had been in the tent. He was not looking at her. "I have been conspicuous my entire life, your Grace," she said. "You have only made it briefly interesting." He turned his head then, just slightly, and she saw the corner of his mouth move. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of one, the memory of a smile a man had used to have and had not used lately. It was gone as quickly as it had come. "You are Miss Harriet Ashcombe," he said. "Your father's elder daughter. You keep the estate's accounts." "I do." He nodded, as though a question had been answered. "May I be plain?" he said. "I would prefer it." He was silent for the length of 10 steps. She counted them, because it gave her something to do that was not looking at the way the last of the light caught the dust on his coat. "I have need," he said, "of a wife." "How?" "By the 23rd of this month. That is a fortnight from Thursday. My reasons are not romantic. They will bear speaking of once we are indoors and out of earshot. I would like to speak to you about it tonight if you will permit. Elsewhere, if you would prefer to wait. But I would prefer tonight." She stopped walking. They were on the gravel by the yew hedge, out of sight of the tent, and she stopped, and she looked up at him, and she said, the first honest thing that came into her mouth. "Your Grace," she said, "I do not know you. You do not know me. I am not a beauty. I am not young. I keep my father's accounts because no one else can be trusted with them, and I am sat at the edge of my sister's wedding, in a made-over gown, and you have come from London, or from wherever you have come from, and you have chosen me, across a room of prettier and richer women, and I would like to know why. Before I answer anything, before I even sit down with you, I will not be flattered, I will not be part of a joke, and I will not bargain with half a story. If you cannot tell me plainly why you crossed that tent to me, then you will hand me back into it, and you will find another woman." She said it all quite quietly. She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. He looked at her. Something in his face moved. Not much. A small softening at the corners of his eyes, a shift in the mouth, the way the surface of a still deep water moves when something below it turns. "You are exactly," he said, "as I was told you were." "Who told you?" "Your uncle. My late wife's cousin. Dr. Ashcombe, of Harrow. He wrote to me last month. He said if I needed a woman who would not flinch and would not lie and could run a house, I should come to Ashcombe and find you." Harriet stared at him. "Uncle James," she said at last, in a small dry voice. "Uncle James wrote to a duke about me. He did. I shall have words with Uncle James. I would be grateful if you did not, until we have finished speaking." She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. She looked at the yew hedge, dark against the last of the light, and she said, "Very well. I will hear you. In my father's library. In half an hour. I would like to change first. This gown was my aunt's curtain, and it is beginning to itch." She saw quite distinctly the smile catch him this time. Before he could put it away, it was not the ghost. It was the thing itself, quick and startled and gone. "Half an hour," he said. "Miss Ashcombe." He bowed. She curtsied. She walked back toward the house at a pace that did not betray her, and she did not look back, and only when she was on the servants' stairs, in the dim of the back passage where no one could see, did she stop with her hand on the wall and let herself shake for the space of 5 breaths before going on. Her father's library was a long, low room that had never quite recovered from the fire of 1801. The bookcases were half full. The window seat had cushions. Harriet had recovered herself. In Blue Duck, 4 winters ago. She sat down in her father's chair, rather than in the smaller chair opposite, because she wanted the size of it around her, and she folded her hands, and she waited. The Duke of Ashford came in with her father, at exactly the half-hour, and her father, who by now had understood that something extraordinary was happening in his house, and had not yet decided whether to weep with joy or with terror, mumbled something about seeing to the dance, and left them, closing the door with the special careful softness of a man who has been told to. The Duke did not sit at first. He stood by the window, and he looked at the shelves, and he said without turning, "I lost my wife in the spring." She did not speak. He went on, "Eleanor. She was 25. She died of a fever that came and went in 3 days. She left me 2 sons. Thomas is 7, Frederick is 4. "I am sorry," said Harriet. He nodded, still looking at the shelves. "My wife's brother," he said, "is a man named Marcus Vane. He is a barrister of some talent and no scruple. He has petitioned a court of chancery to have my sons removed from my care, on the grounds that a widowed father, with no established household of women, is unfit to raise them, and that their mother's family should have the ordering of their upbringing, until they come of age. The petition will be heard on the 24th. I have consulted 3 separate men in Lincoln's Inn. All 3 have told me the same thing. If I am married by the 23rd to a woman of unimpeachable character and demonstrable capability, the petition collapses. If I am not, he stands a fair chance of winning." Harriet did not say anything for some time. At last she said, "He wants the boys." "He wants the estate," said the Duke. "The boys come with it. Thomas inherits at 18. Marcus would have 12 years to manage that inheritance in his own interest before he handed it back. I know him well. He would hand back a shell." "I see." "Dr. Ashcombe," said the Duke, "told me that his niece Harriet keeps her father's accounts, has a head for numbers that would embarrass most solicitors, dresses a wound better than the village midwife, and once, when a governess was cruel to a cousin, made the governess apologize in front of the entire schoolroom without raising her voice. He told me she was a large, plain, unmarried woman of 28, whom the county had decided was on the shelf, and that in his considered opinion the county was a pack of fools." He turned from the window at last, and he looked at her. "I have not," he said, "come here to flatter you. I have come here because I have run out of time, and I would rather offer this to a stranger my uncle vouches for than to any of the ladies of my own set, who would want the title and the jointure, and would resent my children within a week. I need a wife. My sons need a mother. You, if I have understood you correctly, need a place in the world that does not require you to sit in a chair at the edge of anyone's tent again. I am proposing that we exchange these needs. I am aware that it is not a romantic offer. I am aware that a woman of your intelligence will have considered a dozen objections before I finish speaking. I will hear them all." Harriet sat very still. Then she said, "You have 2 sons." "Yes." "Thomas is 7, and Frederick is 4. "Yes." "Their mother has been dead 6 months." "Yes." "Tell me about Thomas." He looked at her, and she thought for a moment he would not answer, and then he did. "Thomas," he said, "has not spoken since April. Not one word. He was in the room when his mother died. He had been singing to her. It was a hymn she had taught him. She had said before the fever took her voice that his singing was the only thing that eased her. And before, when she died, he was mid-verse. My sister-in-law, Marcus's wife, came into the room and told him he had tired his mother out. She said it 3 times, and made him understand it. She told him his singing was too much for her, and that he had helped her go. He has not sung since. He has not spoken since. He carries a small blue ribbon that was hers, and he will not let anyone touch it. Every governess I have engaged has told me he is stubborn, or slow, or possessed by grief in ways they do not know how to reach. The last one left in tears 3 weeks ago. He believes, Miss Ashcombe, that he sang his mother to death. The library was very quiet. Harriet found that her eyes had gone hot. She did not lift her hand to them, because that was a movement people saw. She swallowed once. He sang his mother to death. She repeated, "That is what he believes. That is what he was told." Yes. By his aunt. By his aunt. She sat with it, she sat with the shape of it. She thought of a boy of 7, with a blue ribbon in his fist and a hymn stopped mid-verse in his throat, and she thought of a woman who could look at such a child and put such a thing into his head, and something old and quiet inside her, the thing that had once, at 14, made a governess apologize in front of a schoolroom. "Your Grace," she said, "if I marry you, I will have conditions." "Name them." "I will have complete authority over the nursery, not shared with your sister-in-law, not shared with your late wife's family, not shared with any woman you engage. Mine. If your sons are to be my children in name, they must be my children in practice. I do not accept the title of stepmother if the office is denied." "Agreed. You will tell me everything, every letter Marcus has sent, every conversation with your solicitors, every debt on the estate, if there are debts, if there are not, every asset, so that I may understand what he is after. I do not manage on half a picture, I never have. I will not begin at 28. Agreed. Eleanor is not to be erased, her portrait stays, her hymns are sung, her name is spoken. If Thomas ever asks about her, I will not lie and I will not fumble. She was his mother, Fritz. She is not replaced, I am something else. What that something else is called, I do not know yet, but it will not be her." He was silent. Then he said very quietly, "Thank you." She went on, "I will not perform affection for you. I will not pretend a feeling that is not there, and I will ask that you do the same for me. If we come to like one another, we will know it. If we come to more than that, we will know that as well. But I will not spend the rest of my life wondering whether a kind word from you is real or theater for the servants. That is a torment I have declined to enter, and I will not enter it inside a marriage." He inclined his head, and, said Harriet, because it had to be said, and she would rather say it now than have it lurk, "I am aware of what I look like. I am aware that when we are seen together, your world will say, and my world will say, that you have made a strange choice. I am prepared for it. I am prepared for a great deal. But I will not enter your house as a joke, or as a charity, or as a pity. If you cannot introduce me as your wife plainly and without apology, I will not go. I would rather stay in that chair at the edge of that tent for the rest of my life than take a title as an insult." He looked at her for a long time. "Miss Ashcombe," he said at last, My wife died 6 months ago. I have not slept a full night since. I have 2 sons, one of whom will not speak, and one of whom weeps in his sleep. My brother-in-law is preparing to take them from me, because he believes I am too broken to keep them. And he is not entirely wrong. I have crossed 3 counties on the word of a country doctor to find a woman I had never seen, in the hope that she was a fraction of what he said she was. She is more. I am aware of what you look like. I have eyes. What I see is a woman who set the terms of a marriage before I had drawn my second breath. Whatever the world says of my choice, the world is a fool, and I have known it was a fool since I was 16. If you will have me, I will introduce you as my wife, and I will do it plainly. I will do it more than plainly. I will do it as a man does who knows he has been given something he did not deserve. She looked down at her hands. There is one more thing, she said. Yes, you will not touch me until I know you. That is not a punishment. That is a request. I have never been touched with tenderness by any man, and I would rather not begin with a man who is only doing his duty. When you know me and I know you, we will speak of it. Until then, we will share a house and we will share a burden and we will do what needs to be done. Is that acceptable? That, he said, is more than acceptable. She raised her eyes. Very well, she said. Your Grace, I accept. He did not smile. But he came across the room and he stopped in front of her chair, and he held out his hand, and when she gave him hers he did not kiss it. He held it for a moment, and let it go, and said, Edward. My name is Edward. If we are to do this, you will not call me Your Grace in my own study. Edward, she said, testing it. It sounded strange and small, and rather more human than she had expected. Harriet, he said. Harriet, she agreed. They were married 11 days later by special license in the chapel at Ashford, in the presence of the Duke's steward, his solicitor, a bewildered rector, and 2 small boys in morning coats, who had been told they were to have a new mamma and had received the news respectively in tears and in silence. Ashford was very cold. That was the first thing Harriet noticed, as the carriage rolled through the gates and up the long straight avenue between the limes. Not cold in the season, though the September had turned bitter, but cold in itself, in its stones and its shutters, and the peculiar hush that lay across the gravel. The great house at the avenue's end was beautiful in the grave, dark way that houses are beautiful when their owners have stopped caring. Ivy had been let to climb where ivy should not climb. 2 of the front windows were shuttered, though it was not yet dusk. The steward, standing at the door, was the only man in view. She had come alone, in the sense that mattered. Her father had wept at the chapel, and said he would visit in the spring. Her mother had wept differently, and had said less, and had pressed into Harriet's hand at the last a small pocket testament that had once been Harriet's grandmother's, with a folded ribbon marking the 91st Psalm. Harriet had understood what her mother had meant by it, and had said thank you, and had said nothing else, because there were some kindnesses one could not respond to, without becoming a woman. One had spent 30 years training oneself not to be. Edward met her in the great hall. Thomas and Frederick were in his study, he said, and would be brought when she was ready. The staff had been assembled that morning to be told of her coming. Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper, curtsied and did not smile. The under-butler did not curtsy and did not smile. The 2 maids in the line behind them looked at her with the flat, evaluating expression of women who had watched 3 governesses come and go and expected to watch a duchess come and go by Christmas. Harriet inclined her head to each of them by name. She had learned each name from a list Edward had sent her the week before. She thanked Mrs. Bell for the arrangements, and said she hoped in the coming days to sit with her and understand the running of the house before she interfered with any of it. Mrs. Bell's mouth did not smile, but something behind Mrs. Bell's eyes shifted a 1/4 inch, and Harriet took it and filed it and moved on. "Bring the boys," she said to Edward, in the small sitting room where a fire had been lit for her. "I would like to meet them alone." He hesitated. "Alone," she said gently. "Please." He brought them in and left them, and closed the door. Thomas was tall for 7, dark like his father, with gray eyes gone somewhere very far away. Frederick was fair, and had been crying, and was clutching his brother's hand as though the world might take him next. Both wore black. Thomas had a small blue ribbon wound about the fingers of his free hand. He held it in a way that indicated no adult had ever been permitted to take it from him. Harriet did not go to them. She sat down on the low chair by the fire, and she said, in the same voice she used for the home farm boys, "Good afternoon. My name is Harriet. I am not going to be your mother, because your mother is your mother, and I did not know her, and I am sorry for that. I have been asked to come here to keep you company, and to see that you are looked after, and I hope in time we will be friends. If we are not, we will still be civil, and I will still do my duty by you, because that is what grown people do. There is cake in the kitchen. If you would like some, I would like some. If you would prefer not, I shall have mine here, and think of you." Frederick's face did a small collapse, and he began to cry. Thomas did not move. His eyes were on her face, taking her in the way his father took in a room, and she let him take her in without turning her face away or softening it, and after a long moment he inclined his head, once, a fraction, and looked at his little brother, and touched him on the shoulder. The touch was the first order Thomas had given in 6 months. Frederick understood it. He stopped crying, he wiped his face on his sleeve, which no one had trained him out of, and he said, in a small, watery voice, "I should like cake, please." They had cake in the small sitting room, and Thomas ate his slice, and did not speak, and did not sing. And when Harriet spoke of ordinary things, the horses on the drive, the way the light fell through the window, the odd fact that a tabby cat was sitting on the outside sill and looking at them as though she owned the house, Thomas listened with his whole face and did not answer, and Harriet did not press. When they had finished, she said, "Thomas, may I see your ribbon?" He stiffened. "I will not take it," she said. "I would only like to see it. If you would rather I did not, I will not ask again." He hesitated. Then he opened his hand. The ribbon was blue silk, faded, an inch wide, cut at one end. It had been washed, Harriet thought, not by a servant, but by a child, imperfectly, with soap, and with a shaking hand. "That is a good ribbon," she said. "It has been well kept." She did not touch it. She looked at it and she nodded. And she said, "Thank you for showing me." He closed his fingers over it again and put it back in his pocket. And something in the shape of his shoulders was a fraction less braced than it had been. That night Harriet dined with the Duke in a room that had been dressed for a party of 20 and held 2. The candles were too many, the silver was too much, the soup was excellent and cold. She ate half of it, and said quietly, across the length of the table, "Mrs. Bell has been running this house for 6 months on the understanding that no one cares what she does with it. I do not blame her. Beginning tomorrow I would like to walk the still room and the linen presses and the cellars with her. I do not intend to change anything. I intend to understand." He looked at her down the polished wood. "You are," he said, "extraordinarily like your uncle described. I shall have to thank Uncle James after all." "You should. He is a better judge of women than any man I have met." She smiled briefly, and hid it in her wine. The first weeks at Ashford were the work Harriet had trained her whole life to do without having known she was training for it. She rose at 6. She walked with Mrs. Bell through every room of the house before breakfast and asked questions, and wrote nothing down, because it was important, at the beginning, that Mrs. Bell believed she was not being audited. Quote, she ate breakfast with the boys in the small parlor, because a duke's children ought to know their new mother's face at the start of the day, and by the second week, Frederick had begun to climb into the chair next to hers, of his own accord, and by the third, he was reaching for her hand under the table when the porridge came, and giving it back to her when he was done. Thomas ate quietly, watched, and did not speak. He kept the ribbon in his pocket. He did not sing. She read to them in the afternoons in the schoolroom that had not been opened since April. She opened the curtains that the last governess had drawn against the site of the south lawn, where Eleanor had once played battledore with them. She said, quite matter-of-factly on the third day, "Your mother liked this window, I understand." And Frederick had looked up at her with his small pink mouth open, and Thomas had gone very still, and she had said, "We shall keep it open then." There is no reason a room should mourn a person by refusing the light she loved. Thomas did not speak. But that evening, when she came in to say good night, the ribbon was laid on the small table by his bed, in view rather than clenched in his fist under the pillow. She did not remark on it. She said good night, and she blew out the candle and she closed the door, and in the passage outside she leaned against the wall for a moment with her hand pressed hard over her mouth, because she had not, until that moment, understood how much she had already come to want them. Edward watched. He did not, in the first weeks, know quite what to do with her. He had expected a competent stranger, and he had been given instead a woman who ran his house without seeming to touch it, who wrote his solicitor a note about a clause in Marcus's petition that his solicitor had missed, who sat with his younger son on her lap for an hour reading a book about a rabbit, and who, when she caught him watching her from a doorway, did not blush or preen or apologize, but only inclined her head an inch and went back to what she was doing. He noticed things. He had always noticed things. He noticed that Mrs. Bell had begun to smile when the new Duchess entered a room. He noticed that the under-butler no longer looked past her, but at her, and had begun to hold the door with a straight back rather than a bowed one. He noticed that the tabby cat, which he had considered a stable creature not fit for indoors, had somehow acquired a cushion on the sitting-room windowsill. He noticed that his younger son was laughing again, in the small choking way small children laugh, when they have not laughed for a long time and are frightened of the sound. He noticed that his elder son had begun to sit on the low stool by Harriet's chair in the evenings, not close enough to touch her, but close enough that his shoulder was nearly against her skirt, and would remain there for the length of a chapter without moving. He noticed her. He noticed the way she stood at the long window in the mornings before anyone else was down, one hand on the frame, looking out at the lime avenue, and the way the light fell across her cheek and made him understand, quite plainly and without ornament, that she was beautiful. He noticed the way her hands moved when she poured, steady and unhurried, and the way she thanked the footman by name. He noticed that, when she thought no one was watching, she pressed her palm sometimes to her breastbone as though something in there hurt, and that she never did it when anyone could see. He noticed, one evening, that his elder son had reached out in his sleep, and put his hand on the fold of her sleeve where she sat beside the bed, and had not woken. He noticed that Harriet had not moved for 2 hours. And here's the thing, child. Men are slow and dukes are slower than most, and grief has a way of making even a clever man foolish. Edward Ashford, who had crossed 3 counties for a stranger, because he could not think of a better plan, did not for some weeks understand what was happening to him. He thought at first that he was relieved. He thought next that he was grateful. Only by the 4th week, standing in the door of the schoolroom watching her show Frederick how to draw a horse, did he understand that he was, quite simply, in love, and had been for some days, and had no idea how to say so to a woman who had made him promise not to touch her until she knew him. He said nothing. He had promised nothing else. She, for her part, did not know. She thought he was becoming easier with her because their bargain was working. She saw him watching her and read it as satisfaction with a decision well made. She was wrong, and the wrongness was armor, and she kept the armor on because she had learned early in life that hope was a very fine way to be hurt. The thaw came on a Tuesday in October, in a storm. Frederick had a fever. It came up fast, in the manner of a child's fever, and by evening he was hot and small and calling for his mother in a voice that broke Harriet in the middle of the passage. She sat with him. Edward sat opposite her, in the other chair. The rector's wife had come and gone, and the local doctor, and neither had said anything that helped. The wind was up. The candles guttered. At some hour past midnight, Frederick opened his eyes and looked at Harriet, whose hand had been on his forehead for 2 hours, and said, in a very small voice, "Sing." Harriet did not sing well. She had a low, plain voice that had been laughed at in the schoolroom. She sang anyway. She sang the 91st Psalm because it was the one her mother had marked in the pocket testament, and she did not know she was doing it deliberately until she had begun, and by then she could not stop. "He shall give his angels charge over thee," she sang, "to keep thee in all thy ways." She did not look at Edward. She sang it through once, and Frederick closed his eyes and slept. She sang it through again for her own steadiness, more quietly. And on the third repetition, from the doorway of the room, where he must have been standing for some time, she heard another voice, a child's voice, small, cracked from disuse, uncertain. "Thou shalt not be afraid," sang Thomas, "for the terror by night." Harriet did not turn. She sang on. She did not stop. She kept her hand on Frederick's forehead, and she sang the whole verse to the end, and Thomas, standing in the doorway of the room in his nightshirt, with his ribbon clenched in his hand, sang it with her. When it ended, no one spoke. Then Thomas walked, very slowly, across the room to her chair, and he climbed up onto the arm of it, and he laid his head against her shoulder, and he began to cry. He cried without sound. He cried into the shoulder of her gown until the shoulder was wet, and Harriet, who had learned decades ago not to weep where anyone could see, wept openly, and did not care. Edward, across the room, had put his face in his hands. That was the beginning. Thomas began to speak in small, measured amounts after that night. Not a flood. A trickle. "Please at breakfast," when the toast was passed. "Thank you." Once, in the schoolroom, unprompted, Mama liked the yellow rose. He said it looking at Harriet, and she understood that he meant Eleanor, and she said, "Then we shall put yellow roses in her portrait's room again." And he had nodded, and had not said anything more that day, but he had on his way past her chair that evening. She had understood. She had not touched it. She had folded her hands beside it, and she had left it lie until he came back the next morning and put it in his pocket again. Edward was different too. He came home earlier. He came home from the estate rides at dusk instead of after dark. He appeared in the schoolroom in the afternoons and stood at the door and watched, and would come. When she looked up and sit down on the schoolroom floor beside his sons in his good coat and let Frederick climb on his knee, he said one evening quietly, over their small private supper, "I did not, when we married, expect to want to come home." She had not known what to say to that. She had said at last, "I am glad," and had left it there because she did not know how to hold what he might mean by it, and because to ask would be to hope. Marcus Vane came on a Thursday. He came without warning, in a hired chaise, with a small dark man Harriet took at once for a barrister's clerk, and he was shown into the great hall by a footman who did not know he ought to have said his master was not at home. Edward was out on the north field. Harriet was in her sitting room, with Frederick asleep on her lap, and Thomas on the floor with a book about ships. She came down. Marcus Vane was a handsome man of about 40, with Eleanor's eyes and none of what Harriet imagined had been Eleanor's warmth, and he bowed too low, and smiled too much, and looked her over from her hair to her hem in the space of a single breath. "Ah," he said, and his voice was smooth as new butter. "The famous Duchess. My sister's cousin's discovery. I have heard so much." "Mrs. Vane," Harriet said, though he had not offered his wife's name, and she used the plural deliberately to make clear that she was speaking to a family and not to a man. "My husband is not at home. I did not expect you." "You did not," he said. "That is quite so. May I none the less?" She showed him into the small drawing-room. She did not sit. She did not offer him tea. She stood in the middle of the room, with her hands clasped in front of her, and she said, "You have 5 minutes." He laughed. It was a light, small laugh with something underneath it. "Very well," he said. 5 minutes. "My dear madam, I will be plain. My petition is heard on the 24th. I do not, personally, wish to prosecute it. My wife wishes it. My wife believes, with what I confess is some evidence, that Edward is not in a fit state to raise our nephews. She loved her sister, she feels the boys are her charge. I have come today to see for myself whether her fears are just." "I see," said Harriet. "I have heard," said Marcus softly, "that Thomas has begun to speak." She did not answer. "I have heard," he said, "that a certain hymn was sung at a certain hour, and that the boy joined in." She kept her face very still. "You have your informants, Mrs. Vane," she said. Marcus's smile did not falter. He said, "I have my niece Charlotte, who was one of your parlor maids until Mrs. Bell dismissed her last Friday for tale-bearing. I have a great many informants, madam. I would like to speak to Thomas." "No," said Harriet. He raised his eyebrows. "I beg your pardon. You may not speak to Thomas. You may not speak to Frederick. You may not walk further into this house than this room. If you would like to speak to my husband, he will call upon you, at your inn, this evening. If you would like to speak to me, you have 3 minutes remaining, and you had best make them count." He looked at her. "You are," he said slowly, "a rather more interesting creature than I was led to expect." "I am told so," said Harriet. "You know, of course, that a marriage contracted 11 days before a chancery hearing, to a stranger, on a country doctor's recommendation, will not weigh with the court as it would if it were a marriage of long standing and evident affection. I am aware, you know, of course, that the court will send a woman to observe you with the children, to see whether the household is stable, whether the new mother is truly a mother or a hired figure. I am aware, you know, of course, that if any doubt is cast on your character, the court will lean strongly to my client." "Mrs. Vane," Harriet said gently, "you are your client. Do not pretend otherwise. It is unbecoming." The smile went out of his face. What replaced it was quieter and worse. "I will find," he said softly, "whatever there is to find. Mrs. Ashford, a woman does not reach the age of 28 unmarried in a small county without leaving a wake. I will read every letter you have written. I will speak to every man who has ever refused you. I will find, if there is anything to find, that you are exactly the desperate spinster we suspect, who married my brother-in-law for his title and his money, and cares as much for his sons as she cares for the paintings on his wall. And I will bring what I find to the court on the 24th. And you will lose those boys. Do we understand each other?" Harriet did not blink. "We understand each other perfectly," she said. "Now leave." He left. He bowed at the door. He left, She sat down when he had gone. On the sofa, and she put her hands flat on her knees. And she waited to shake. And she did not shake. What came instead was quite different. It was the same old, still, small thing that had made a governess apologize in a schoolroom when she was 14, and it had grown up in the years since. And it was very calm, and it was very hard, and it was, when she inspected it, ready. Edward came in through the boot room an hour later. She met him in the passage. She said, "Marcus Vane has been here." He was not admitted past the small drawing room. "He has threatened me with a private investigation, and he has hinted that a maid, Charlotte, was in his pay while she served here. Mrs. Bell dismissed her last week for tale-bearing. He wants Thomas. He is coming for us on the 24th. I need you to sit down with me tonight, after the boys are asleep, and tell me everything. Every letter, every clause, every account. I will not go into that courtroom half-informed." He looked at her. He did not say what he had been going to say when he came in from the field, which had been something small about the frost on the north hedge. He said at last in a low voice, "Harriet." "Yes. I should have been here." "You did not know," she said. "Now you do. Meet me in the library at 9. She turned to go. He caught her wrist. It was the first time he had touched her since the day of the wedding, when he had put a ring on her finger in the chapel and let her hand go at once. She stopped. She did not turn back. "I am sorry," he said quietly, behind her, "that you have had to meet him alone, that you have had to stand between him and my sons, that I asked you here on a bargain, and this is what the bargain has cost you." She looked down at his hand on her wrist. It was warm. It was steady. And it did not tighten. "Edward," she said, "I am not standing between him and your sons. I am standing between him and our sons. Please, let go of my wrist. I need to speak to Mrs. Bell about the tea." He let go. She went. And that night in the library they worked until 2 in the morning. Edward brought every letter Marcus had ever written him. He brought his solicitor's notes. He brought the accounts of Eleanor's marriage settlement. He brought a small folded paper he had never shown anyone, in which his late wife had written, in the last week of her life, a list of instructions for the boy's care, and had signed it in a hand that already shook. Harriet read them all. She noticed, on the 3rd page of the marriage settlement, a clause that referenced entailment on a small property in Kent, that no one had spoken of in the recent correspondence, and she asked softly, "What is Marston?" And Edward said it was Eleanor's mother's cottage, a small house of no great value. Eleanor left it to Thomas outright. Outright, yes. To Thomas, yes. Not into Marcus's trust. Not into anyone's trust. To Thomas at 18. "Because," said Harriet slowly, tapping the page with one steady finger, "if Marcus wins guardianship of Thomas, he acquires management of every one of Thomas's inheritances until Thomas is 18, except this one. This one is held by the trustees Eleanor named in this codicil. Do you know who her trustees were?" Edward looked at her. "Dr. Ashcombe,"